The story I'm about to tell is a little difficult for me to talk about for two reasons. One is that the main part took place when I was around 4 or 5 years old, which makes it a little difficult to remember most details surrounding the story, which is part of the reason it's haunted me for 20 years. The other reason is that this story makes me feel really uneasy to even think about, and this might be the only third time I've ever told it in full. So some quick background to this story is that I was born and raised in an extremely close big family. We all lived within about a mile from each other, around a large park in a small Texas town. An unrelated fun fact for those horror fans out there, this park is the present-day location of the majority of the town that dreaded sundown murders. Now, my family was jam-packed full of aunts and uncles, and I'd say I saw them all at least once a week for my entire childhood. I can't stress enough how close we all were growing up, and how trusted they all were, as it plays an important part in this story. This story came up recently between my older brother, my mother, and I, because I opened up about a series of nightmares I've been basically plagued with for as long as I can remember. These nightmares are always very similar, and basically always consist of me as a small child in my childhood home, attempting to escape my house while something horrible chases me. The something is never actually visually seen, but it's more like I sense this massive looming person reaching out at me from the dark, and it always catches me before I can get outside. This usually results in me waking up in a cold sweat. These dreams always seem to center around these very vague yet oddly detailed memories of a babysitter that I once had. Here's where it gets odd. These memories I have are almost like dreams. I very specifically remember the details of what was happening and the feelings I had during, but everything else is just out of reach. That goes for the babysitter herself as well. I remember it was a white female who was middle-aged, but I can't for the life of me recall her face. In my memories, it's like I never really ever got a good look at her. The two specific incidences I remember were not happy ones. The first memory I have is that whenever I would get in trouble, for what I have no memory of, I would be forced to sit outside on the back porch in just shorts and a t-shirt during winter. I remember because I would shiver and sit there quietly, scared complaining would cause more problems. The second memory was even worse to me. The babysitter loved to play this game she made up. She would turn off all the lights in the house and go hide deep in one of the back rooms. I was left in the front room and told that if I wanted food or to watch TV, I had to find her first. I never had any idea where she was hiding, and if I ever found her, she would jump out screaming like a madwoman and chase me. I remember hearing her laughter at my fear. I remember often being so frozen with terror that I would sit on the ground near the front door, too scared to even go try and find her. No matter how long I waited, she would never come out of hiding, no matter how hungry I got. I remember this one time very well. I was so little and scared. I was whimpering as I slowly built up bravery to walk into the back hallway looking for her. My hunger felt deadly at this point, and I needed to find her. I checked bathrooms, bedrooms, closets, and nothing. She was nowhere. I remember standing in my parents' bedroom, just trying to figure out where she could be, when I saw her. She was a dark shape under the big bed, peeking out at me from under the bed skirt. We stared at each other unmoving. I couldn't make out her face, but I knew she was smiling at me, like a crazy feral animal under there. I remember her sliding herself along the floor, so fast. I screamed and turned to run as she made it to her feet, and then the memory goes dark. I don't know what happened after that, and that scares me just as much as the memory I do have of the event. I never shared these memories because they seem so distant and I often wondered if they were even real. One day when I was in my 20s, I mentioned the nightmares to my mother and brother when we were just sitting around talking during one of the weeks where my brother and I were home from college. We would often do this and tell funny stories, and remember all of the kids we knew from long before. Then I decided to ask my mom about the babysitter. She seemed confused. She told me she'd never hired babysitters for either I or my brother. Because of how big and close my family was, and how protective my mom was of us, she never trusted anyone but family to watch us. My aunts and grandmother were the absolute opposite of the woman I remember. Loving, kind, fun, and treated me almost like their own children. I couldn't imagine any of them doing these things to me. My mom seemed genuinely confused, but also slightly worried like a mother would when hearing such a horrible story. She told me she truly couldn't even begin to imagine who I was talking about. With her certainty, and with the memories being so vague in important places, I decided I must have imagined it after all. Then my brother brought it up again the next day when we were driving together. "Yeah, I remember that," he said with some concern in his voice. "Like, I remember seeing you get taken outside and being forced to sit there, and I thought it was so horrible. I don't know why we never told anyone." He too had no memory of who the woman was, but he remembered feeling defenseless over the whole thing. He only had vague memories of the horrible game she would play, but pointed out how he has absolutely no memory of her ever targeting him with her torment. He remembers the events as if he were just an audience member. He did, however, remember some things that I didn't. This included that I often got in trouble because I would often use my imagination to tell stories, and that the babysitter would get mad at me when she realized it wasn't true. This resulted in me getting kicked out of the house. I just want to point out that my brother is only 1 year older than I am, so he too would have been very little. I've thought about bringing it back up to my mom, but I honestly trust that she has no idea who I'm talking about, and I don't want to make her feel horrible about something so long ago that she clearly has no idea about. I just wish I could understand what the hell happened, and who the hell she was. My brother never brought it up again after this, but told me at the time that he had always played that memory off as being so young, and just misunderstanding whatever happened. So this isn't one of my paranormal experiences at the local port, but it still creeps me out when I think about it. A lot of spooky shit happens to me for some reason, but that's beside the point. Last year, in 2018, it was a very busy year for me, meaning that I had little or no time to date or meet any girls. Due to my busy schedule, I decided to make a Tinder account. I've never had any experience with such apps or online dating, and I didn't actually plan on meeting up with a random girl to go on a blind date or anything. I just wanted to see what the fuss was all about, and if that shit actually worked. So the app still being something new to me, I matched with this really pretty girl. She seemed short, light-skinned, and had a nice smile. Her account wasn't a catfish or any sort of fake profile. It seemed genuine and legit. Anyway, I know that I didn't actually want to hit it off with any girl in this manner, but she was very pretty, so I said, fuck it. I slid into her DMs with a simple hey. A couple hours went by and we got each other's Snapchat users and phone numbers. We exchanged Snapchat photos, so with that said, there was no way that her Tinder account was a fake. I felt better knowing that for some reason. She said that she lived in the city that was about 20 or 30 miles north of mine. I had nothing planned for the next day, and neither did she, so we decided to meet up at her house the next day to mess around. The next day came by, and we planned to meet up at around 10:30 p.m. The neighboring city where she was from was about a 30 to 45-minute drive from my place, so around 10 p.m.-ish, I decided to start driving over. As I'm driving over, I get a phone call from her telling me to instead go over at a later time at around midnight. I didn't mind since I have friends who lived in her city, so I paid them a visit. Meanwhile, I waited for her. 11:45 rolled by and I started to drive to her place. My friends didn't know what I was up to. They just thought I popped in to visit them randomly. So this girl sends me her address, and at first the address that she had sent me led me to this upper-class suburban neighborhood. I reached the address, and it was close to what I would describe as a white mansion. I called her to tell her that I was parked on her driveway, and asked her to come outside so I could assure myself that it was the right place. She said, "I don't see you. Are you sure you followed the directions?" Well, to avoid any more fuck-ups, she just sent me her current location through iMessage. At first, I found it odd, but I followed the directions to the location anyway. So midnight rolled by, and I was on my way to her current location, which was actually kind of far from the address she had originally sent me. As I'm driving, the directions are telling me to drive off the path and into a dirt road surrounded by cornfields. This spooked me a little, because I was now in the middle of nowhere. I was about 10 minutes away from any civilization. Red flags started to trigger in my head, but I ignored them, because there was no way that her account could have been a setup. I had seen her pictures on Snapchat, and you can't Photoshop those as far as I'm aware. So after driving through a dark-ass dirt road through the cornfields, the directions led me to a broken-down old house. It looked uninhabitable. There were no cars outside or in the driveway. The only light I saw on was the porch light. I called this girl to tell her that I was outside. She replies with, "Okay, I'll be right out." On a side note, I'm a pretty big dude and I train every day. I'm not easily intimidated by others, but there are some situations where you're just helpless and have no option but to evade for the fear for your life. So I'm waiting by my car when I see this figure come out the front door. It was dressed like a nun. Black veil, long dress, voodoo charms, and she's holding a fucking voodoo doll on her left hand. I was pretty spooked out, but I thought maybe it was just a prank. I gave it a few seconds for the cameras to pop out. But the person just stood there, and I slowly started to realize that this wasn't a prank, because a few seconds later, I saw another figure in a similar outfit peeking out of a door, starting to make a run towards me with a fucking machete. I don't even bother trying to fight back, because I knew I was probably going to end up gutted or skinned alive by these psychos. I immediately jumped in the car and floored it the fuck out of there. Then I heard a gunshot a few seconds later behind me. I'm in my car screaming prayers with tears in my eyes, because I was hoping to drive away with my life. Her number kept calling me as soon as I left. I blocked it, and then another number started to call me. I blocked that as well. I ended up staying over at my friend's house that night. I explained everything that took place, and he wanted to go check it out together with our group of friends, but I was too terrified to even approach that place. I called the police and they went to check it out, but the place was completely abandoned by the time they got there. They said that the address has been vacant for years, and they simply made a report out of it. The people were never found out. The whole thing was a sick setup to begin with. The girl was planning on luring me so they could do God knows what to me. I deleted my Tinder account. I'm pretty sure it works if you're just looking to get laid or something, but I somehow had the worst luck my first time I ever decided to use it. Don't ever meet a stranger somewhere that isn't public. Shit can always go sideways. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, where you left your doors unlocked and came home when the streetlights turned on at dusk. After moving away for college, I decided to move back to my quiet, sleepy hometown in one of the 2 apartment buildings. I'm living there for roughly 3 months, when one night I go to sleep early on a Friday night. Now, I'm a reasonably hard sleeper, so when I wake up in the middle of the night to noises, I'm immediately alarmed. I'm going to describe my apartment layout for a bit of a better understanding. As you walk in the front door, the kitchen is to the left and the living room to the right. There's a hallway straight ahead with one bedroom at the end. A bathroom is to the left in the hall, and my bedroom is to the right. I get up from my bed and walk around to the end of it and peek my head out of the bedroom door. I look to the left to see my front door wide open to the outside hallway. There's a loud voice coming from my unlighted kitchen. From my vantage point, I was unable to see into the kitchen. I froze. This fact I've left out of the telling of this story since. It's not something I'm very proud of, but I want to relay this story in its entirety. It may have been only a couple of heartbeats, but to me it felt like an eternity. I come to my senses after realizing that I've stopped unconsciously breathing. I take a shallow breath to steady my mind and try to gather my bravery. There's no thought process about what to do at this point. I let my body and my instincts take over. I turn around and head back to the far side of my bed, grab my phone from the nightstand, and quickly remove it from the charger. Luckily, my bed frame is high enough for me to squeeze under without much difficulty. I immediately realize that there's no escape from my hiding spot if things turn south. I'll have to rely on luck to get me through this. I dialed 911, and a woman answers and asks about my emergency. I briefly explain in a whisper that an unknown man is in my apartment, and I'm currently safe. I lay there listening to the chaos in my home, reassured by the presence of my cat, Marcy, laying under the bed with me. It seems to me that he's in a phone call based on the one-sided rambling. I tell the operator this fact and explain my fear that he's going to bring other people into my home. He's making enough sound to allow me to give a play-by-play on the call. The man starts screaming about killing someone. I'm unsure at this point whether he's talking to the person on the phone or if he knows I'm there. The voice is unfamiliar, but this does little to ease my terror. He then starts ringing the doorbell in the outside hallway and yelling for me to come out. My blood runs cold as I realize that he might come try to find me. Marcy is alarmed by the doorbell that hasn't ceased ringing, and she creeps out from under the bed. I panic. What if he hurts her? I start whispering as loudly as possible to get her attention without letting him know my location. She senses my unease and crawls back under the bed with me. At this point, it felt like an eternity, and I ask the operator how long until the police arrive. She's unsure but assures me that they're on their way. My town is roughly a 30-minute drive to the nearest city police, but I assume there's a highway patrol that would be arriving soon. Little did I know that safety was in to rush to get to me. I hear him walking around my apartment when he enters my extra bedroom, which is my storage room with a bed. He hasn't stopped yelling all this time. I'm still unaware whether or not he's on the phone or not. I hear him mention that this must be a kid's room. I shush the operator because he ceased his screaming for the moment, and I hear more noises like he's going through boxes and throwing things around. Then my fear is realized as I hear him quietly enter my room. I see his feet walking to my closet from my vantage point. He starts going through my clothes and emptying my hamper onto the floor. He turns around and walks to my bed and sits down. I stopped breathing. I think he laid down at this point because the pressure of the bed lessens on top of me. He's deadly silent, and I'm still trying my best to hold my breath. There's shuffling and moving around when he gets up and walks out of my room. I take a shallow breath and steady my conviction. He starts making noise again like he's throwing and punching things. I inform the operator that he was just in my room and the police need to hurry. I don't know how long I can keep Marcy under the bed, and I'm concerned about what could happen if he finds me. He walks back into the kids' room quietly. I shush the operator again because she continually asks me for a play-by-play. I hear him breathing from the other room. After the quietest few minutes of my life, he yells, "Who's there?" I freeze again, listening for movement, but nothing. I'm starting to get lightheaded from my shallow breathing. The silence is deafening, and I fear he's trying to detect me. After a lifetime, I hear footsteps entering my apartment. I hear a man's voice say, "Hey man, you're in the wrong house." I've never felt more relief in my life before this night or since. I hear my door close and I crawl out from under the bed and break down. The adrenaline and anxiety take over as soon as the feeling of safety washes over me. A female officer comes to my side of the bed and puts her hands on my shoulders. I'm trying to keep it together and failing miserably. She let me put my clothes on, and I could hear 3 male voices coming from my apartment. The woman left and came back with a handful of clothes, asking if any weren't mine. They all were, and I answered in kind. She shut the door behind her as she left again. I turn to look out my window and see no lights from the cop car on the street. I look at my phone and realize the call to 911 has taken almost 20 minutes. I can't explain the feelings I had at this time since many hit me all at once. The door opened and the officer motioned to have me exit. Taking a first look at my home was almost as anxious as the event itself. My apartment was in disarray. Clothes were everywhere, mixed with garbage, and belongings from my shelves and counters. The man had removed items that he intended on taking and placed them in the outside hallway. They told me that they found him on the floor in the second room, completely naked, holding a bottle of lotion. In his vicinity, there was a winter hat with an unknown substance inside. The officer was kind enough to throw that in the garbage bag immediately. They tell me to look and see if any of the clothes in the apartment don't belong to me. I tell them no. This man entered my home completely naked and destroyed it. I noticed that the lid of my garbage can was filled with cat poop. It seems that it had been separated from the rest of the bag. The rest of the garbage was littering the outside hallway. They asked me if I would like to stay here or go somewhere else. Thankfully, my parents lived down the street, and I had an officer drive me there. I explained to my parents what had just happened, and in the next few days I felt like I had to explain the situation to half the town. The ridiculousness of this story catches people's attention and becomes a slight joke. I play along, attempting to be lighthearted, but I'm unable to disassociate from the horror I had faced. Now, I should feel better knowing he's in custody, but the events after the break-in do little to comfort me. An officer shows up with a subpoena to appear in court to testify, but I receive a call for postponement. I just wanted this to be behind me. After a month, I call the phone number on the paper I received and ask when they're rescheduling for, since I hadn't heard anything. The woman informs me that they mailed another and I had not shown up. I asked, where was it sent, since I haven't received a summons? She tells me they sent it to my address, but in the wrong town. How can they not know where I live? The crime happened here. She tells me that he pled guilty and was given 180 days. I was furious. This man would get out in a short 8 weeks for attempting to steal and entering my home. She reassured me that he received another 180 days for a previous bench warrant he had. What justice is there that someone with priors gets a short 3 months for traumatizing a stranger? After his release, I kept track of his location using the sex offender registry. He had relations with a child years prior. It makes his statements about the kid's room even more unsettling. He was arrested yet again for a 4th DUI shortly after his release, and sentenced to 5 years with 2 suspended. I was happy for a while. My nightmares hadn't ended, but the tension I felt during my waking hours lessened. It's been 2 years since this happened, and I've moved 3 times. I don't know if I'll ever be content and happy anywhere, but I'm hoping that's not the case. He was released 6 months after his conviction for some reason or another on parole. He immediately disappeared and fled from his parole officer and sex offender registry. I'm currently planning a cross-country move to try and rest my mind. I'm hoping someday to grow out of these nightmares.